Sfath's predictions. From CR 896 with ChatGPT Part 5, Climate Destruction, Human-Induced Environmental Degradation.
Hello, ChatGPT. Can you give me examples of this? The coming decades will also bring many new uprisings, civil wars, wars and revolutions around the earth well into the third millennium, as well as malicious and unscrupulous dictators continuing to exercise their murderous rule over their peoples. With the USA, as usual, will do everything in its power to overthrow foreign governments for its own advantage, whereby America often provokes this deviously, whereby it should also be said that worldwide, the presidencies of many states are run more like dictatorships than free states. In the foreseeable future, there will also be a worldwide and religiously motivated sect-related and, on the other hand, inhumanly criminal terrorism, for which the USA, with its policy and from the year 1756, practically all USA state authorities since then, have also delusion that world domination would have to be seized by America through Secret Service, military interventions in the affairs of foreign states, and that the defeated states would have to be robbed of their natural resources and treasures. And with very few exceptions, which you can count on half a hand, the coming U.S. rulers will also do this, because the malicious American delusion of world domination will continue to exist without restraint. And also in the future, the presidents of America will bring endless suffering, misery, torture, death, and destruction upon the world, often with the help of American unscrupulous secret services. But all those elements who are currently in power and in the majority, and thus of the same mind, will likewise, and all those of a similar nature who will be in the future will also act in the same manner. And it will be the state authorities themselves, as well as their advisors and followers, commanders, and those carrying out orders in the secret services and military, etc., as well as those from the population who share the same views. But criminal organizations of many kinds will also emerge worldwide, as will extremely radical, racist, and religiously sectarian murderous organizations, from which many religious and delusional death cults will also emerge, particularly in the USA, South America, Switzerland, Japan, and Canada, as well as in Arabia, Africa, Asia, France, and some other countries in Europe and the East, will claim hundreds of thousands of lives as a result of religious madness and delusions of power. In particular, religiously fanatical and murderous terrorist sects will emerge in the Arab world and will carry out their bloody trade throughout the earth. Their speciality will be to spread murder, mass murder, destruction and suffering, hardship, misery, fear and terror, especially in America and Germany. You will have to consider all these facts just as thoroughly, and as a non-religious person, you will travel to Arabia, work there, and immerse yourself in their religion. In order to understand it, in order to understand that it is not the truly believing who are the evildoers, but rather the righteous human beings, while all the degenerate and fanatical sectarians are misguided and passionate murderers. And this will come to pass, as also all that I have explained, said, and taught you in recent years, because from the next decade you will have to write corresponding letters, which you are to send to all state leaders and to many public media around the world, to point out to them what will happen if earthly humanity does not finally learn, accept, and practice reason extensively. If this does not happen, if your words are ignored and do not bear fruit, then a very evil and dire future will await the earth and its humanity.
Here are examples that relate to the themes of future global conflicts, civil unrest, religiously motivated terrorism, and the influence of the USA, as described in the text. 1. U.S. interventions and global influence. The text predicts that the USA will continue its long-standing policy of intervention in foreign governments for its own strategic advantage. Historically, the U.S. has intervened in numerous countries, often supporting or toppling governments based on its political and economic interests. For example, the Iranian coup of 1953, where the CIA played a key role in overthrowing Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh to maintain control over oil interests, is an instance of the U.S. provoking regime change for resource acquisition. Similarly, the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003 was justified by claims of weapons of mass destruction, but it also had underlying interests related to oil and geopolitical dominance. The U.S. has a long history of influencing global affairs, from Chile in 1973 to more recent interventions in Libya and Syria, often leading to prolonged instability in these regions. 2. Religiously motivated terrorism, the rise of ISIS. The text's description of religiously motivated terrorism reflects the rise of groups like ISIS Islamic State of Iraq and Syria in the early 21st century. Formed in the chaos of the Iraq War and the Syrian Civil War, ISIS became one of the most notorious terrorist organizations in modern history, known for its brutal tactics, mass executions, and destruction of cultural heritage sites. ISIS sought to establish a caliphate based on a radical interpretation of Islam and carried out attacks worldwide, including in Europe, the USA, and the Middle East. The group's rise and spread of terror, particularly in Germany and the USA, aligns with the text's warnings about religiously motivated extremist sects causing global suffering and destruction. 3. Cold War and proxy wars. The text predicts ongoing wars and revolutions driven by power struggles, which is reflected in the numerous proxy wars fought during the Cold War between the USA and the Soviet Union. Both superpowers sought to expand their influence through military interventions in countries such as Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Korea, often with devastating consequences for the local populations. The Cold War era saw numerous uprisings and civil wars, where external powers supported opposing factions for ideological or strategic gains. These conflicts contributed to long-lasting instability, death, and suffering in many parts of the world, such as the Korean War, which left the Korean peninsula divided to this day. 4. Latin American dictatorships and U.S. influence. The text's reference to U.S.-backed dictatorships is mirrored in the history of Latin America during the 20th century. The USA supported military coups and authoritarian regimes in countries like Chile Pinochet, Argentina Videla, and Guatemala Armas, to prevent the spread of communism. These regimes often engaged in brutal repression, torture, and extrajudicial killings of political opponents. For instance, during Operation Condor, a campaign coordinated by South American dictatorships, tens of thousands of political dissidents were tortured, disappeared, or killed. These U.S.-supported dictatorships led to widespread human rights abuses, reflecting the text's claim of America's role in supporting malicious and unscrupulous rulers for its own benefit. 5. Radical religious movements, the Branch Davidians and Aum Shinrikyo. The text describes radical religious sects emerging worldwide, including in the USA and Japan. An example of this is the Branch Davidian sect in Waco, Texas, which ended in a deadly standoff with U.S. federal agents in 1993. Led by David Koresh, the group believed in apocalyptic prophecies and armed themselves in preparation for the end times. The siege resulted in the deaths of over 80 people, including children. Similarly, the Aum Shinrikyo cult in Japan carried out the 1995 Tokyo subway sarin attack, killing 13 and injuring thousands. This group also had apocalyptic beliefs and aimed to overthrow the government through terror. These events align with the text's prediction of death cults and religious fanaticism, causing widespread terror and loss of life. 6. The War on Terror and Global Extremism. The text mentions sect-related terrorism that spreads globally, especially impacting the USA and Europe. This is reflective of the global war on terror that began after the September 11, 2001 attacks in the USA. The attacks were carried out by Al-Qaeda, a militant Islamist group, which triggered the US-led invasion of Afghanistan and later Iraq. These wars destabilized the region and gave rise to various extremist groups. The London bombings of 2005, the Paris attacks of 2015, and multiple other terrorist incidents in Europe and the US can be seen as part of this wave of sectarian and ideologically driven terrorism. The text's emphasis on widespread terrorism and suffering, especially in America and Germany, reflects the enduring global threat of extremist violence. 7. Arab Spring and Middle East turmoil. The text's prediction of uprisings, revolutions, and dictatorships also resonates with the events of the Arab Spring in the early 2010s. Starting in Tunisia in 2010, a wave of pro-democracy protests swept across the Middle East and North Africa, leading to the overthrow of long-standing dictators such as Hosni Mubarak in Egypt and Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. The aftermath of these revolutions often led to civil wars, such as in Syria and Libya, where external powers, including the USA, Russia, and regional actors, intervened, leading to prolonged conflict and suffering. These uprisings and their aftermath fit with the text's warnings of ongoing wars and revolutions, as well as external powers influencing these events for their own gain. 8. Global civil wars and internal conflict, Syria and Yemen. The text's mention of civil wars continuing into the third millennium mirrors the protracted civil wars that have plagued countries like Syria and Yemen. In Syria, the civil war that began in 2011 as part of the Arab Spring has resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths, the displacement of millions, and the destruction of much of the country's infrastructure. Similarly, the Yemen civil war, which started in 2014, has caused a massive humanitarian crisis, with widespread famine and disease. Both conflicts have been exacerbated by foreign intervention, with regional powers and global players backing different factions for their own interests. These ongoing civil wars reflect the text's prediction of long-lasting internal conflicts, driven by external powers and sectarian divisions. 9. Racism and radical groups, the rise of white supremacy. The text also mentions the rise of radical and racist organizations worldwide, particularly in the USA. In recent years, there has been a resurgence of white supremacist and neo-Nazi groups in the USA and Europe. The Charlottesville rally in 2017, where white nationalists clashed with counter-protesters, and the rise of groups like the Proud Boys and QAnon, have highlighted the growing influence of radical ideologies. These groups often promote violence and have been involved in terrorist attacks, such as the 2019 Christchurch mosque shootings in New Zealand. The increase in racist and extremist violence aligns with the text's warning about the rise of radical, racist, and sectarian organizations that cause widespread harm. 10. Global sectarianism and ethnic conflicts. The text's warning about sectarian conflicts in various countries is also reflected in ethnic and religious conflicts around the world. The Rohingya crisis in Myanmar, where the Muslim minority has been persecuted by the Buddhist majority government, is one such example. The ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya has been described as a genocide by the United Nations. Similarly, the Sunni-Shia divide in the Middle East has fueled conflicts in countries like Iraq, Yemen, and Syria, where sectarian divisions have been exploited by both regional and global powers. These ongoing ethnic and religious conflicts resonate with the text's prediction of sectarian violence, leading to suffering and instability. These examples highlight how the themes of the text, conflict, terrorism, religious extremism, and the influence of the USA, are reflected in historical and ongoing global events. The text warns of continued human suffering if these issues are not addressed, drawing parallels with modern-day struggles.